when you have a culture that really desires to, I think there's good reason to think, is trying to undermine the natural parental authority. That's when we ought to have, our antennas up. Okay, Erin, I want to start off today's podcast with a little test for you.
Oh my gosh, you love to do this.
Well, this is an easy one. I think you'll be able to pull this off. I'm going to read you a news headline, and I just want you to tell me if this news headline is real or fake. You have one of two answers here. Okay. Real or fake. Okay, here's headline number one. Police in Germany rescue man chased by baby squirrel. What's your guess, real or fake?
Jeez. Fake.
Okay, she says fake, and the answer is real.
No.
I need a buzzer. Wrong. It sounds unlikely, but this did happen. The police sent out a patrol car to help, but luckily the chase ended when the baby squirrel curled up and fell asleep.
What kind of man runs from a baby squirrel?
Maybe, I don't know. Okay, here we go. Real or fake headline. Elderly woman trains 65 cats to steal from her neighbors.
Oh, that's for sure real.
That's real? All right, the answer is fake. If a headline contains big numbers, it's a clue that it might be clickbait, Erin.
Oh, it was 65 cats. If it was 6 cats, it would have been real.
Yeah, it could have been. All right, here's another headline, real or fake. Skittles used instead of salt to help clear ice and snow from roads in Canada. Is that real or fake?
I've gotten everyone wrong so far, so fake.
She says fake, and the answer is fake. Very good, Erin. You know your candy. All right. Well, those are some humorous headlines. But on this episode of the Maven Parent Podcast, we want to deal with some real live headlines or real
that aren't so funny.
I don't know if I'd say real live headlines. I don't know if that's the way to put it. Real life headlines. These are headlines, are not so funny. But they're the kind of thing that we as parents living in a secular Western cultural context have to sort through. And I think a lot of parents feel burdened by all of the news that's out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to, I feel that. Like it's hard to wade through all the information that comes out and all the things that are going on in the news and all of that. But since this is a parent podcast and we think about, obviously the topic of parenting and raising our own kids so much, I was recently in the doctor's office in the waiting room and the TV was on. So like local LA news was on. And
local LA news. It's already
so it's a lot of stuff about celebrities and things like that. But there was a story, and the newscaster lady said, new study has been done and shows that teens trust teachers over their parents for their emotional struggles. So, of course, my ears perked up. And so they went on to say that this new study showed that teens trust their teachers much more than their parents when it comes to things that they're struggling with, and that they go to their teachers more often. So
now, maybe before we jump into that particular headline and that article, I think maybe we'll step back and narrate for the parents kind of what we want to do in this podcast. We want to kind of think out loud with parents. Okay, so you hear this kind of headline and it kind of can throw you as a parent. It communicate, like deciphering what the message is, because it might be a little subtle here. And just trying to navigate this kind of stuff, we want to try to model a little bit of this. And so we want to think out loud with you about some of these headlines.
Yeah.
And how we decipher through them. Okay.
Yeah.
So you heard this headline.
So I heard it, and
office.
it bothered me. And so even as I'm finished up the doctor's appointment, I'm thinking about this headline and thinking, first of all, is that true? Are teens trusting teachers more than their parents?
Okay, so you were bothered by this headline. You
Yeah.
said you're bothered by that. So what was it about it that bothered you? Because that's what first gets your antenna up.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess that's true. Because I wanted to know if that headline was true, because it bothered me. And it bothered me because, of course, there may be rare circumstances where a child's teachers are a safer place than their parents. Of course, I know that, of course. But in general, if this is a study that shows majority of teens feel more comfortable talking to their teachers than their parents about emotional struggles. So, for example, they might feel more comfortable talking to their math teacher at high school about their emotional struggles than their parents. That is upsetting to think about, because of course, there are a lot of wonderful teachers out there. A lot of them are in my family. But parents, of course, are the closest people in a child's life, in a teen's life, and they're the most trusted people in their lives.
And they should be. They are the primary authority in a kid's life.
Right. And so, and teachers, although well-meaning and can really love their students, they're not invested in the children in their class. It's not even possible to be invested in the children in your classroom the way parents are invested in their own children. And any teacher listening would know that was true if they're a parent, because they know their own kids. And I think my mom's a perfect example of this. Like, my mom was a teacher for, almost 30 years. Loved her students, went above and beyond for her students, but obviously has sacrificed and given and invested much more in my three sisters and I, her own children, than her students. And she was an amazing teacher.
Yeah, those kids in your classroom, you're able to send home at the end of the day.
Right.
And you're sometimes, let's face it, teachers, right? You're glad that you can send them home.
Yes, you haven't changed their diapers and fed them for 18 years and poured into all the time. And okay, so if this is true, that the majority of teens trust their teachers more than their parents, this is a really bad situation.
So just stepping back and kind of narrating this, I think one thing when you know and understand the Christian worldview, well, part of that tells you God's design for the family. Mm-hmm. And God's design for the family is one man, one woman, coming together for one lifetime, to be, unified in marriage, and then to have children. And it's that man and that woman, that mother and father, who are the primary caretakers of those kids, the primary disciplers of those kids. And that child-parent relationship should be closer and more influential and more authoritative than any other kind of adult-child relationship. And so I think that's where we're kind of starting here. There's this Christian worldview that is an accurate description of reality. It's the way God has designed things. It's supposed to be this way. And now here's a study that is showing, hey, things may not be this way. Mm-hmm. So it should get our red flags up for that reason.
Yeah.
So I'm just sitting back thinking, hey, one thing that helps us navigate the headlines, the news headlines, and so much of the news headlines is that you start with the foundation of a Christian worldview. Yeah. And you start with good theology, and you start with biblical truth. And all of that lays a foundation to evaluate these things. And it will help you see things that you might not otherwise see.
Yes.
Because if you hear this, right, if you hear this headline as a parent, as a Christian, teens trust teachers over parents with emotional struggles. If that doesn't at least bother you at some level, you might want to think, well, why not? I may not have a strong biblical view of these things in place.
Yeah, we may have gotten so numb to the breakdown of families that it's like, well, yeah, teachers are great, and so that's good teachers are. It's like, no, this is like we've talked about on the podcast, these spheres of sovereignty that God established. And so that's what you're talking about, right? The family. And then, so the family is the first sphere. Of course, well, God's the first sphere. He's the authority overall. He establishes the family. So that's the next authority over us. Mm-hmm. Then the church. Mm-hmm. And then government. Yeah. So you have these spheres of sovereignty. Government is further down than parents. Mm-hmm. So if government is now a more trusted source to children than their own parents, that should cause alarm for us.
Yeah, because you're talking about probably a lot of these are public educators. I don't think it gives a breakdown in terms of whether or not it's public or private educators.
No, it didn't
But
say.
the point is either or doesn't matter. There's a challenge then to the natural order that God has designed and the authority given to parents. Yeah. And so this is I think this needs to be emphasized over and over again today, is that the primary authority in a child's life is the parent. That's their God-given sphere of authority. And when government encroaches in on that, we better be real concerned.
Right. Because it's a disorder. It's a disordered, it's a disordering of the way God's designed it. Yeah. Now, because of sin and breakdown and all that happens, of course, there are times when the state will come in, and because parents are abusive or whatever, or there are times when the church will intervene, when the state will intervene. But
even in those situations, we could argue that it's actually the least effective of the different institutions. It'd be more effective if other family members stepped in when there was abuse, or when there was neglect or abandonment, or a parent died or whatever. But other family members stepping in is far superior than a foster care system. Mm-hmm. And again, not to denigrate a foster care system. It's good when there aren't other options. Yeah. But family would be first, and then church and even other private charities and other private institutions are more effective than government. And so it doesn't mean there's not a role for government, but figuring out what is the role of government, what is the role of the church, and what is the role of families, will help us see where jurisdiction lies for these things. Yeah. And so all of this is part of the Christian worldview. And so that's why this gets our kind of our, what do you call it? Not our nerves. It gets on our nerves. No, it gets our red flags.
Yeah. It gets our attention for sure.
It gets our attention.
And these are the types of things I think we do want to pay attention to as Christians and not become numb about. Yeah. So this headline upset me. So I did some digging. I sent it to you and
with a lot of angry face emojis.
No, I think
didn't that come in? That text was like, and it had like the cover up, like you were cursing.
No,
it wasn't that message?
No, it wasn't. That was a different one. Okay, so I did some digging, and then when you actually, so it was like the article I read was from Washington News, but about the study. But when you then read the article, then I got more mad at the news ladies and the headline than the actual.
You're really upset all the way around. Erin gets really angry at certain things. I'm trying to pull her out of the 24-hour news cycle.
Oh my gosh. Okay, no one believes you. That's not true. Okay, so I did some digging, and it turns out this was an internet poll. It was an online poll. And so we can talk about problems with online polls. But anyways, as you kept reading the article about the study, other facts about it came to the surface, and it wasn't quite as bad as the headlines, teens trust teachers over their parents.
Well, it sounds like it says study finds, right? And so when you think about a study, you cite a study, oftentimes when I think that phrase is kind of used, you think, okay, there's some in-depth research here, right? This is a study. A study means you study, you do some research. There's maybe discussion with other researchers.
There's some effort that was put in.
This is done over a long period of time.
Right.
We want some reliable results. And then we start reading the article, and at the very end it says, this is the CVS Healthcare Morning Consult. I don't know what Morning Consult is, but CVS is I'm assuming the pharmacy. It's their online poll. So it's an online poll. It says they surveyed 500 parents and 340 educators of teens aged 13 to 17 on August the 12th through the 23rd. Okay, and then it gives a margin of error, which be interesting to figure out how you determine margin of error, right? Because this makes it sound, says the margin of error was plus or minus 3 percentage points. So it could be off 3 percentage points either way, but that's not a very large margin of error, it would seem. Okay, so it's an online poll.
So it was done online. It was volunteer, and it was over about 11 days.
Yeah.
And so
this is not the in-depth study that kind of comes to mind when it says, XYZ study finds.
And I do think it's important to, when we hear headlines and hear about studies, that we do actually look at what was done for the study, because people bring up studies all the time. We've brought up Barna research and all this stuff. Okay, so it's important to know.
Well, there are some names that you trust.
Right.
In terms of studies, because you know that these folks have a track record of doing studies well.
Yes.
They're well researched. They're fair. They try to, do them comprehensively. And so like Barna would be one. Pew Research is another respected name. But so when you hear that a study finds something, it's always good to just have healthy skepticism, especially when you see something that's seeking to undermine Christian truth. There's a healthy skepticism there. Now, it doesn't mean this is not true. It doesn't follow that it's not necessarily true, but it might be the case that this study doesn't do enough to support particular conclusions. So there's a healthy skepticism when you hear about studies.
So we looked at, like, Pew Research you mentioned. They talk about the accuracy of polls, and especially online polls. And they talk about how they do their polls by telephone. And in contrast, online polls use participants who volunteer to take part and don't have any kind of proven records of accuracy. And so one reason they do telephone polls, they said, is that not everyone in the U.S. uses the internet. That's kind of hard to believe, but I guess that is true. And there are those who do not use the internet and are demographically different than the rest of the public. So to really get a survey of, like, the public, you have to go at it at a different way than just, hey, take this online poll and volunteer to do it.
Yeah, there's plenty of people who are online, and so they would represent, like, a different demographic, different mindset. You're going to get different answers.
Yeah.
So an online poll is going to be maybe a more narrow in terms of who are going to be the respondents.
Yeah, so they give this example of, in 1998, there was an online poll about, should President Clinton, this is taking us way back, President Clinton, should he resign because of his relationship with a White House intern? Well, the online poll was like over 52% of Americans said yes, he should And what they found out from doing telephone polls is the number was a lot less. And they found that the president's critics were highly motivated to register their disapproval for his behavior. So they were upset.
Yeah.
And any chance they got, they would voice their frustration. And so they give this example of how it distorted the actual facts about who really wanted him to resign and who didn't. So they gave a good example.
You don't have controls. It would seem, maybe on some of these online polls, you don't have controls over kind of trying to mix up the demographics.
I'm not sure you would even have controls to know how would you verify that they're teachers.
Yeah.
How would you verify that they're parents?
It's like self-reporting on this. So, okay. So that's another step in this.
Yeah.
Just have have a healthy amount of skepticism when it comes to these kind of things. But then when we looked into you look into the details, right? It says that according to the study, 78% of educators say students aged 13 to 17 have reached out to them with a mental or emotional concern. Okay, here's the contrast. By comparison, 58% of parents say their children in this age group have confessed similar struggles to them. So it's saying 78% of educators had these kids who took initiative, reached out to them to share with them mental or emotional concerns. Only 58% of parents report that happening. So that's 20% less. Okay. And so as a result, the survey reported that educators are significantly more alert than legal guardians to teens' mental health, with 76% of teachers and 43% of parents expressing concern. So based on that, they're drawing a conclusion that the educators are significantly more alert than the parents. And then it says, most educators, so then it goes into more detail. It says American teenagers share more family issues with teachers and more school issues with parents, the study found. Okay, most educators named family dynamics and relationships, 94%, self-esteem, 91%, some other ones, as top emotional stressors that teens divulge to them. Parents mentioned academic pressure, self-esteem, 52%, 51%, as the biggest issues they hear about. And so you have these different issues, right? Well, which makes, there's some common sense here where it's like, well, yeah, a kid is, especially in the teenage years, looking for other people to kind of talk about, or maybe even to complain about their parents, or to find a sympathetic ear. Maybe reached out and shared some stuff to, an educator with struggles with family. And, I think what we need to ask is, well, what conclusion do we draw from that? Right? Does that mean, therefore, that the parents, the educators are more alert than the parents because the kids went to them about, about these struggles?
Yeah.
Well, it could be, again, so that doesn't mean the parents aren't having conversations with them, but maybe it's not that the kid brings those things up to the parent, but it doesn't mean that those conversations aren't happening.
Well, yeah,
it could be that the parent is bringing those up with the kid. Yeah,
and it says basically the opposite, then, that the students talk to their parents about their school problems. So like you were saying, okay, you look to other people to talk about your family problems, and you look to, so it
You're not
seems
going
to
to complain
show
to the teachers about the academic problems as much.
So then shouldn't they draw the conclusion that the teachers aren't as alert to school problems as parents are?
That's a good point. Parents are more alert to the academic issues.
You don't find that in the article. So it's interesting that even in the article, they have to reveal the results, and then at the very last paragraph, they have to reveal how they actually did the study. But it seems to me they use the opportunity to talk about parents like, oh, parents aren't alert. Oh, parents aren't trustworthy. Oh, kids, they don't want to talk to their parents. And it's just so misleading. And I think even the way they laid it out is a way to undermine parents.
Yeah. And now, okay, at the same time, okay, so we're kind of carefully picking apart this headline, which is what we need to do. And I think when you do that, what we see is that, yeah, this is not a headline that parents really need to be concerned about in any serious way. Now, it doesn't mean that this isn't an issue. What it means is that this particular study does not reveal that this is an issue. So on one hand, we want to have that healthy skepticism. On the other hand, it may be something to actually consider, like the issue of, hey, am I creating the kind of environment in my home where my kids do come to me with their struggles, right? Like, I mean, so it's not that we are just reputing everything that's out there that kind of comes against us and undermines parenting. No, we of course, at the same time, we always want to be teachable. We want to continue to grow, get better at our relationships with our kids. So we're not saying don't look to be teachable at all, but when you have something that when you have a culture that really desires to, I think there's good reason to think, is trying to undermine the natural parental authority. That's when we ought to have, our antennas up.
Yeah. So the other headline that actually both of these kind of fell on the same week. So we thought, okay, we'll talk about this headline too, because this one definitely got our attention. And it definitely went around Twitter and some of the conservative news sites, some social media sites, and the book that we're going to talk about ended up being taken down from Amazon. So actually, before we even bring up this book, if you have little ears listening, you may want to put headphones in or listen to this later, because this is a topic about sex, and so I wouldn't want our 11-year-old hearing this conversation, for example. So in case you have listening
Jonah,
ears.
get out of here. He's standing over there listening.
No, he's locked in his room right now.
All right, good. Well, here's the headline. Sex education book instructs parents to let their young children watch them have sex. Yeah, that would get your attention. Or it should get your attention.
It definitely got a lot of people's attention.
Yeah.
So you want to tell them about the story?
Yeah, so there was, I think it was a Twitter account called Courage is a Habit, which is, they're I think a fairly new Twitter account that is looking to help equip parents, give them tools, strategies to defend their kids from some of the indoctrination they see
in the K through 12 education. Yeah.
In public education. So, which is, I mean, that's good. We need, what we traditionally have called watchdog organizations. We need organizations helping us.
Yes.
Because, as parents, it's so hard to keep up with everything. It's hard to stay on top of everything. I mean, just making it through a normal day, and then now you've got to, we're got to throw on vetting every single piece of material that is in our kids' education. It's a tough task. So, having a group like this is helpful. And so they took screenshots of this book, and the book is entitled Sex Education for 8 to 12-Year-Olds, Kids Book for Good Parents. And it's written by a lady named Anna LeBlanc.
Which now they're even saying they're not sure if it's a real person.
Okay.
But
so anyway, so we saw the headline.
Yeah.
Gets our attention. So again, just a healthy skepticism on what this might be. Look, it's you can have you can get bad news from all kinds of sources along the entire political spectrum, religious spectrum, whatever. And you just in today's day and age, in this age of information, when there's so much information, there again, the healthy skepticism. And so before we simply bought this headline, now here's one thing that struck me about it. Number one, I read the headline, you sent it to me, and I read it, and I thought, yeah, I mean, before I did any looking into it, I thought, yeah, that doesn't surprise me, right? And so there's a thought right there, is like, well, okay, this certainly is plausible. Now, why is it plausible?
That there would be a book that would suggest this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, this is a screenshot of the book, and one of this is page 47, and it says there are tips to get you started with educating your child about sexuality. Couples can deliberately leave the bedroom door open or ajar, expressing intimacy. Okay, or call upon your child to bring or take something away while you are expressing intimacy. So like you're making love to your your husband or wife, and you're like, hey, come here for a second.
So it's purposely exposing them. That's the whole chapter is like this whole chapter. I forget now what the title of the chapter is. I'm trying to find that. But the whole purpose was to how to basically teach your children about sex, and that's by exposing them to it. Yeah,
take your child into bed with you and allow him or her to watch as you share intimacy.
It's so horrifying.
Yes. I mean,
it's so upsetting.
It is. But in this day and age, there was a plausibility to it, right? Which I think, I look at that and go, well, that's the fact that it's plausible that this is something that's material out there.
Well, it is a book that's out there. So it was selling on Amazon, and Amazon has now removed it because there was so much publicity around it.
Yes.
And I noticed Thrift Books removed it, and some other websites that were selling the book have removed it now. I think because of all the press that it's gotten about it. So we know it's an actual book. We don't know news-wise if it's a real person who actually really published this or not.
Well, it's when we did some research, what we found, and research, what we mean by research is just like clicking on the Amazon link, looking into it, and it looks like it's a self-published book, right? There wasn't there wasn't a major publishing house behind this.
No, it was self-published, yeah.
And there's a number of bad reviews on it, and it got taken down. And there's questions about whether or not the author is real. And so this is not, so the good news is that this is not some kind of major textbook that's used.
And had a lot of influence.
It had a lot of influence. And so, but this is where conservatives can go, kind of go off the rails.
What do you mean conservatives?
Like political conservatives?
Well, I'm wondering what you mean.
Well, yeah, it's probably a combination of both. Often religious conservatives are political conservatives. Not all political conservatives are religious.
Yes.
Right. But so conservatives in general, just those who would hold to some kind of more conservative.
Traditional. Okay. That's it.
Yeah. So there are times when, we can get really upset about things. Or there's headlines here or there, and there's all this outrage that's expressed, and we just need to be careful that we don't, if something fits with what we think is a cultural trend or a danger. Mm-hmm. So like this, of course, the sex education of our kids is a real concern, and what we're seeing in particularly public schools with sex education, with all the gender ideology stuff, with the LGBTQ stuff that's in there, there's tons of examples, plenty of evidence out there to suggest, hey, this stuff is getting pushed to younger and younger ages, and the ideas that are getting pushed are deviant. They're sinful ideas. They're evil, and so that stuff we need to be concerned about. But then when you hear something like this, it can be easy to say, oh, that fits the that fits, kind of what I'm hearing out there. And so we just, kind of go crazy on that or blast it or amplify it. And then it can actually kind of make us look dumb if we're not, or it makes us look like we're not very careful. And we want to just be thoughtful on all that, on no matter if the headline is something we would agree with kind of right off the bat. Okay, so that was the second headline that caught our attention, and it's good that it caught our attention. I mean, that kind of thing, right, is something that we hear that, and as obviously as a parent, that is that's an area of our kids' education that we should be invested in. In fact, I think it's our primary place to educate them on those issues.
We should have a proper protectiveness about who's teaching our kids about their sexuality as parents, especially as followers of Jesus. We should have a healthy protectiveness of who is going to teach her. I mean, this book was targeted to 8 to 12-year-old, or it says, for parents of kids who are 8 to 12. But any age of kids, you as a parent are the overseer of who's teaching them about their sexuality, and hopefully you are their main teacher about that.
Yeah, and I think here's the other side of these, both of these headlines and all the headlines, is that we also want to be putting forth a positive vision of the Christian worldview, of biblical truth on these things. So we hear, and we'll have examples of the, a negative example of what not to do. And then we warn against it, right? Parents should be the trusted resource for their kids. Parents should be the ones teaching proper sex education to their kids. And we want to do more than just critique. We also want to kind of be motivated to then say, all right, we don't want to just react and, yell and scream about these things. No, okay, then this motivates us to redouble our efforts to say, okay, I need to be the one who is properly teaching my kids about human sexuality and God's design for that. I'm the one who needs to foster the kind of closeness with my kids so that they'll come to me. And so sometimes headlines, I think, it as Christian parents, we can allow it to discourage us. We don't know how to navigate it. And I think we want to say, hey, look, hopefully what we've been able to model is, how do you think through this?
Are you saying I shouldn't have gotten mad at the doctor's office?
No, that was your anger is always righteous anger, Erin. It's always righteous anger.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. This is being recorded, right?
Yeah. So what I was saying before your righteous anger got involved is that we want to make sure that we're offering a positive vision as well. And sometimes the headlines, we feel like it's all doom and gloom out there. And that's another thing about, I think, kind of sifting through all these headlines. So much news out there is bad news. And so this is why we need to make sure we also take a break from the headlines, but then when the headlines are doom and gloom, we fall back on the Christian worldview. The Christian worldview is not all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
The Christian worldview gives us reason to hope, even in the midst of evil, even in the midst of hostility, even in the midst of all these bad ideas. Yeah, so I hope this podcast episode was helpful. What we kind of wanted to do was just think out loud with you and try to model how we navigate the headlines, how we navigate stories, how the kind of questions that we're asking, the healthy skepticism we bring to it, and then our response. Our response is not to let it, discourage us, but to actually redouble our efforts. So we hope you're motivated to redouble your efforts and, as you disciple your kids. And let me just encourage you before we check out here, hey, subscribe to the podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notifications button. On iTunes or Google Play or whatever podcast software you're listening to this on, or app or whatever it is, subscribe, leave us some feedback. send in your questions. We love getting questions. In fact, we're going to be doing an upcoming episode answering some of your questions. So check in with us.
Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.